What's going on, you good humans? Welcome to guest episode 191 of Good Humans podcast with a very, very special guest by the name of Dr. Libby Weaver. Dr. Libby is a world-renowned nutritional biochemist. She is absolutely incredible and she has so much knowledge that she shares in this episode. She's a best-selling author. She's written multiple best-selling books and she's just pretty much one of the top people on the planet when it comes to health, wellness, and understanding how to take better care of our body. And she focuses on the three different key areas, which are biochemical, nutritional, and emotional health. And throughout this chat, there's so many great tricks and tips that you can use to improve your well-being and your mental health as well. If you're watching on YouTube, hello, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, really trying to grow the YouTube this year. And if you're just listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you could do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button as well. And yeah, leave us a 5-star rating. That really helps us move up the ratings. Leave us a little comment if you're enjoying the episodes. But most importantly, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you share it with somebody. If you find the information valuable, you believe that you're going to get a lot out of the information that you learned today, make sure you share it on with somebody else because, yeah, it really means the world to get this podcast spreading and to get this information in people's ears to hopefully, improve their lives as well. If you haven't already, check out thegoodhumanfactory.com. You can learn all about the wellbeing workshops that I run with corporate groups, with high schools, sporting clubs, primary schools, and events as well. You can also learn more about the merch that we do over there. Use the code podcast for a big 25% off. And if you want to join a community all around giving 1% of your day to your mental health, just send us a DM on Instagram at The Good Human Factory saying, I want to join the club, and you'll get added into a community of people giving 1% of their day to their mental health. It's completely free. It always will be. And it's a beautiful way to take a little bit more control of your mental health. All right, that's enough from me today. Let's jump into the episode. Welcome to Good Humans Podcast, Dr. Libby Weaver. How you going, Libby?
Cooper, it's a joy to be here. Thank you so much for having me join you.
Thank you so much for coming to my little home setup. I love getting to bring people into my little beach shack. It's getting knocked down in a couple months, actually. So you're one of probably the last people who get to experience it. So thank you so much for popping over. You are someone who I'm very excited to have a chat with. You're a doctor, you're a scientist. Yeah, you've got a PhD in biochemistry.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, do you want to give us a bit of your resume before we jump into the chat so people can understand maybe a little bit what they're going to get into hearing today?
Yeah, for sure. So, I grew up in Tamworth in country New South Wales with chickens in the backyard, and we grew some of our own food. And I was really fortunate that I had parents who would talk to me about the value of food. So if we pick an orange from the tree, it was just a normal conversation that, it's got vitamin C in it and that helps. If you eat that, it's good for your immune system and colds won't last as long or you won't get a cold. So that was just a general kind of topic of conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably where the seed was planted for me to then study nutrition. So I went to uni then for 14 years, which I know makes me sound really thick and like I failed everything, but I very much love learning and still do. So I originally studied nutrition and dietetics and then did honours and then did a PhD in biochemistry. So wow. Yeah, lots of science in my background. But since then I've worked with people one-on-one in lots of different settings, health retreats, private practice, athletic teams, all sorts of things like that. And when you work with people one-on-one, obviously that's where the rubber really hits the road. That's where you get to see what really makes a difference in someone's life and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. So I've combined my 14 years at uni with my 20 plus years of clinical experience to create what I call my 3-pillar approach. And those 3 pillars are the biochemical, the nutritional, and the emotional. So I look at absolutely everything through those 3 lenses. So wow. Love the science, but also really love people's stories and understanding the meanings they've created from their experiences and marrying all of that up, because I think all of that creates the health that we then get to experience.
I'm so excited for this chat. There's topics that I just get so intrigued about, like why our body works the way it works and how different things that we ingest, the different ways that we move our body, the different ways that we breathe, how that affects the way that we live our life. And we're going to learn so much today. But I want to get to know your story a little bit more. Like you told us a really brief sort of highlight elevator pitch just then, but we're going to go a bit deeper. So before we kick into that, I ask everyone the same question to start. What are you grateful for right now, today in life?
My senses. So I feel so lucky that all my 5 senses are operational, and I love utilizing them as much as possible in every moment. So even just walking here just now, noticing the way the air felt on my skin and the fragrance in the air, because there were frangipani trees. And so that experience of utilizing my senses, it helps to ground me and keep me really present. And it's just not lost on me that not everyone gets to experience all of those senses all of the time or even permanently. So it's I feel so grateful for my senses.
I love that. I think everyone listening, who has access to all of their senses will be hopefully reflecting and feeling grateful too. And even people, who might not have access to hearing or smell or sight can still, have a few senses hopefully to experience this life.
And there's actually really extraordinary research, but also people's experiences of if they do lose a sense, others are enhanced. And it just shows you, the magnificence of the body, that it can alter in that way.
Yeah, so interesting. So interesting. So let's go back to the start. Growing up in Tamworth, a little bit of farm life, growing your own fruit, having chickens. What was life like as a kid?
I loved it. I spent a lot of time in the backyard, and helping the chickens grow up was a really good time. My dad made the fatal mistake of telling me that the ones who didn't have mummies, if I tapped my fingernail on this little tin, it would teach them how to eat. And so I've been obsessed with having chickens ever since. So
I had chickens in my backyard growing up.
Did
and then
you?
the foxes got them, and then it was just like a massacre, and there's
Same.
feathers everywhere.
That's
Same. I think everyone has it. It's so heavy.
But it helps you to learn, doesn't it, about life and death. And
Yeah, absolutely.
but to me, they're the best pets on the planet, and they've all got personalities. I had 3 girls. They've all gone now, sadly, all to foxes. And I watched a TV show a few years ago called Schitt's Creek, and I named it after the girls in Schitt's Creek. Moira, Alexis and Stevie were
How good is Schitt's Creek? I watched it too.
How good is
it's
it?
Hilarious.
Yeah. So many life lessons in Schitt's Creek. But they were my most recent group of girls. Anyway, they're gone now, sadly. But they were beautiful, and I loved them. So I had that growing up and loved that. My dad, we didn't grow up on a farm, but my dad was a real farmer at heart, and he would get wheat every year and plant it in a thing in the backyard because he wanted to see what the wheat crops looked like out west. So I sort of grew up with this real awareness of food and where it came from a really young age. I'm an only child and feel really, I know there's drawbacks and benefits to that, but I'm very focused on the benefits of that. And my parents and I are still really good friends. They're really beautiful human beings, and they're very quiet people. They still live in the same house where I grew up.
Oh, wow.
And,
so do my parents, actually.
Yeah, it's a great gift, isn't it? And the familiarity of that and the warmth of that. So it was a really happy time.
What do you see as some of the benefits of the single child life? I think from a state as I know the work you're in now is like being mindful and being okay to be alone. Something I spoke to someone recently about being an only child, and they said, one of the benefits was I learnt how to be by myself. And if you're not an only child, you're kind of always around your brothers and sisters, whereas an only child, you kind of learn how to entertain yourself and be okay in your own company. Was that one of the benefits?
Without doubt, and to the point that I need it. It's almost, I have to, whether it's introversion, and I'm really quite introverted in my nature, but time by myself is so essential. So, I actually love it and thrive from it.
What other benefits?
I think when I see this sometimes, and when we're little, attention from the adults around us makes us feel safe and secure, and I think it translates in our nervous system to feeling loved. And so then if you think when another baby comes along, we have to adapt to that, and we can, and of course we do, but when we're little baby humans, that divided attention, we can either create a really empowering story from that, or a story that later shows up as something that might hurt us. Like my parents preferred my sibling to me, or they loved them more than me, that kind of stuff. And none of, I really trust in whatever we do, whatever meanings we create inside our own mind from our experiences are supposed to be the case. None of this is to lay guilt on parents, not for a second. I really trust that whatever meanings we create from those experiences are the ones we're supposed to make, because it's what we then get the privilege of unpicking when we're adults and pulling apart. And it's where I think some of our greatest lessons and our greatest unlearnings come from when we're grown up.
Yeah, as long as we build the capacity to reflect. I had a great chat with Lael Stone recently. Have you heard of Lael?
Yeah.
Parenting expert.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
And we had a really good chat about, both of us, we kind of went back and forth about like me sharing some of the things that I've noticed that were unhealthy kind of triggers and patterns that came from my upbringing. And she shared quite a few things about her as well, which is quite interesting. And the thing that I think is just super important is to build that awareness, is to like stop and have that awareness. And when it comes to, unlearning self-beliefs, I learned something in a breathwork course last night that I was doing. And it's this idea of like 4 A's. And I don't even think it was to do with this, but I just felt like these 4 A's are great. And it's like, step 1 is building the awareness to like actually notice. Step 2 is acknowledging the trigger. Step 3 is accepting that, I am doing something like this. But then step 4 is taking action to like unlearn it. And I just love that, like the 4A version of it. It's like, okay, but the step 1 is like awareness. And I think most people, not most people, but a lot of people lack the awareness to actually notice those constant things and self-beliefs and triggers that continually come up for them.
And that's a huge place where your work would make such a difference for people, having these really open conversations. You're so generous with what you share and what you share personally. And so that then fosters others, I think, to inquire within themselves. So it's so helpful.
Yeah, I think that self-inquiry is so important, like that reflection at the end of each day. Did I live with integrity to my values? Did I live with integrity to my word? Did I say I was going to eat healthy today and I didn't? Did I say, just trying to check in with yourself is so important. Let's talk about high school. What was your high school experience like? Were you into sport? Were you into your study? Where did you think life was going to go after school? Were you like, I want to be in the field that you ended up in? Yeah, tell me about high school.
Such a fun question. I loved high school. I had a really great bunch of friends, one in particular who is still my best friend to this day. And German was my favourite subject at school because I had a very amazing teacher and he was so inspiring, and he used to live in Germany, so you can imagine as a child growing up in Tamworth, that felt like a world away. And so through his stories and also his passion for learning the language, I got really into that and loved that.
Wow. So can you speak fluent German?
Not anymore. I went to school there when I was 17 for 3 months and then ended up going to uni there again 10 years later and studying German language and literature. I was in the middle of my PhD then and really fed up with it. So I wanted to use the other side of my brain for a bit. But I can understand it still okay, but I can't speak it as well now.
I'm just like you told me off air that Germany is one of your biggest, your third biggest behind New Zealand and Australia for your products with bioblends
and my books,
Yeah, and your books. And you said, Germany's a big audience for my books too, which is, I was wondering if that was just coincidence or because you've spent a bit of time there.
It is actually just what's happened. I've got a wonderful publisher there and they've been incredibly generous with the way they've shared my work.
Amazing.
So not so much related to the language, but I've done some press conferences over there and
so cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It's good.
So cool. So you love learning, you had some great friends. Love German.
Played tennis was my sport. Tennis
nice.
Obsessed.
Wow.
I would have coaching twice a week and played 4 times a week. So I would ride my bike to coaching after school, and that was tennis was my world. And then I stopped that when I was in Year 12 in my last year of high school to study more. And now it's the only place I really have a temper tantrum is on a tennis court because I can't, at age 50, I can't play the way I did when I was 16 and it does my head in.
I bet.
So I actually went back to coaching. How old was I? Oh, it doesn't matter. I think I went back to coaching when I was about 45 because I thought, this is insane. I've got to be able to do this really well again. So I went to coaching for 3 years and life got busy again and I stopped prioritising my tennis coaching. So anyway, I still love it and watching it at the moment.
I need to watch some of it. One of my a friend of mine, Thomas Van Cut, just played in the Oz Open in the men's doubles for his first Oz Open experience, which is really cool. And one of my ambassadors with the Good Human Factory is Storm Hunter, which if you follow the tennis a little bit, you'd know Storm's name. Storm Sanders, now Hunter. Yeah, she's been an ambassador for the Good Human Factory for years.
Oh, so great.
Yeah, I still haven't got her on the podcast. That's a long story, but I'll get her on there very soon. But she's amazing. So getting towards the end of school, where did where were your passions? You've just given up tennis. You wanted to focus on your study. Where were you like hell bent on dietetics, nutrition out of school, or what was your interest at the end of school?
You're so lovely to ask that. I actually, and anyone who knew me then, I really had no ambition. I wasn't a goal setting. I didn't operate like that, and I still don't really operate like that. I'm very much something occurs and I have this yes no moment. So I never set out to study nutrition. I loved writing. All I knew was that the only thing I probably knew leaving school was that I wanted to write a book. The state, I didn't know what about. In the yearbook, when I finished high school, when it said ambition, I just said to save the world. So, which is, kind of crazy, but it was more, I guess I just wanted to, what I can see I meant, I wanted to contribute in some way.
To a greater good.
Yeah. And so I originally studied journalism, and then I realised I only really wanted to write about human health and behaviour. So then I studied psychology, and that was at uni, that was a lot of rats and stats, which was not my vibe. I wanted to get straight to the juicy stuff. I really wanted to answer the question, why do we do what we do, even though we know what we know? So why is it that a lot of people have great knowledge about how to live, but they don't apply it? So that's been a real driving force in my own curiosity to understand humans.
I literally have a shirt that says knowledge is knowing, wisdom is doing. Like wisdom's more important than knowledge. Like most of us are pretty knowledgeable.
Yeah.
But how wise are you? How well do you use that knowledge?
Yeah. Yep. So then I realised, I really wanted to go deep into nutrition. So then I did nutrition and dietetics and loved it from day one. So loved the science of it and also loved the psychology of it.
Yeah.
And so that was a bit of a surprise, really, to me that I ended up doing that. And then what was an even bigger surprise, at the end of dietetics, I was working in a public in a public hospital in the outpatient clinic. So people weren't life or death kind of sick. They were coming in with lifestyle related conditions.
And stuff,
yeah. And my supervisor said, you've got 3 weeks left before you're fully qualified. You can run the outpatient clinic, and if you get anything really complex, come grab me. And it's a big story, but the short version of it is, through my time there, I saw 3 children who had really significant health issues, and I changed their diet, and the 3 of them got their symptoms resolved. And they'd had a lot of medical attention, and they'd been investigated for all sorts of awful illnesses, and yet it was just their food. And it made me think, how am I sitting here as basically a student? I didn't ever use the word dietitian, but that's what I was. How am I sitting here as a student dietitian, and I'm finding this after these kids have had so much medical attention? This is insane. And so I rang the guy who had been my immunology professor, who wouldn't have remembered me from a bar of soap because I was one of probably 900 students, and described what I was seeing. And he said, you should do a PhD. And I said, oh no, I'm terrible at science. I find it really difficult. I'm a people person. He's like, no, you're very curious. You've got a curious mind. That's really what you need to do a PhD. So that's how that ended up happening, which was a very big surprise to me, that I did a PhD in biochemistry, but I loved it.
I'm so glad you went there, because that was going to be my next question. First, I've had a few people who have written PhDs on this podcast, but I'm going to be honest. Like, what is a PhD? Just for, like, I have a very good idea of it, but for anyone listening right now, you hear the word PhD come around quite often. So what is a PhD? And what was the topic for your PhD, and why did you love it so much? And what did you discover?
So
Sorry, very loaded question.
You basically go down a rabbit hole on a single topic.
Yeah.
So
you write a PhD is a research paper, right?
Mine was research-based.
Yeah.
Some are theory-based, but mine was research-based.
Okay. To prove something, right? And it has to...
You have a hypothesis and you prove it or disprove it, basically.
Yep.
So mine, what I originally was looking at, I wanted to investigate the role of cow's milk protein in constipation in children, because clinically I was seeing a lot of children with little kids with bowel compaction. They were beyond constipated, and gastroenterologists were having to do surgery on some of these kids and have part of their bowel removed. And that was just really confronting for me. And I thought, if we could, there was some decent stuff in the literature already linking cow's milk protein to bowel compaction in some children. But anyway, I couldn't get ethics approval, because everything's got to go through an ethics committee that the university signs off on. and it was taking a long time. And this was actually, this part of the story actually gets me quite emotional because it changed the course of my life. So I ended up doing my PhD working with children with autism. And this was back in the 90s when it was very much considered a purely neurological condition. And my patients were severely impacted with symptoms.
Yeah.
So they were non-verbal, self-harming, most of them not toilet trained. So that when I speak of autism,
Very high on the spectrum.
very, very high.
Yeah.
And requiring a huge amount of support.
Yeah.
So they were, but the way I ended up there, so when I was at uni doing dietetics, my flatmate, treasured friend, she was studying art. She was studying to become an art teacher. And we used to laugh how I had to do 36 contact hours per week and she had to do about 6. And she used to laugh saying, you've got to do all this reading. And I don't read, I just get to look at pictures. But whenever I liked a boy who didn't like me back, she used to say to me, oh, don't worry about him, he's got a brain disorder. And it was just this throwaway comment meant in jest, and she was trying to make me feel better. Anyway, she then moved to Melbourne, and I was still in Newcastle, and one day she sends me a cutting out of the Melbourne Age. Like, she didn't even read the newspaper, so her boyfriend at the time must have been reading it. And all she wrote, she had fabulous handwriting, and she'd written on this article she'd cut out, this must have been what was wrong with all the boys who never liked you, because the heading in the Age said milk linked to brain disorders. And because all she knew was that I was trying to look at milk and constipation, and she used to tease me, don't worry, the boys have just got a brain disorder, that's why they don't like you. And she'd kind of married up these two things in my life and sent this article to me. And I read it, and it was research that had come out of America by a man called Robert Cade, and he'd found fragments of certain food proteins in the spinal fluid in animal models of schizophrenia and ASD. And I went running into my professor and said, I don't fully understand this, but this is what I want to do. And so the whole course of my PhD changed.
So
and
you
I
pivoted
started
from constipation to autism,
working
the
with
effects of milk and autism. Wow, cow's milk and autism.
Yeah, and all sorts of dietary components related to that. So, and particularly related to gut health. And it's kind of hard to imagine, I know, Cooper, but it was at a time we didn't even have the phrase gut microbiome. Like I used to get feces samples from the kids sent to me in little eskies, and I had to plate it out to see what grew, which I didn't tell my mates that's what I was spending my days doing. But we just called it a gut bacteria profile back then. So we were, our knowledge of the gut microbiome, I think, is still tiny, but it's improved since then.
So what did you find?
So the children had really high levels of some fairly concerning types of gut bacteria and very low levels of some really beneficial ones. They also had much higher levels of certain amino acids in their urine, and they were amino acids linked to the breakdown of connective tissue. So there were significant metabolic changes in 74% of the kids in my study.
Wow.
Compared to the control group. So yeah, I learnt more about the body, I think, through that time than I kind of did in my life up until then. And I learned a lot about family dynamics and just how precious everyone is, no matter what their lived experience is. And I actually never set out to make a difference to autism. It was the mothers would bring the children to me because of their gut problems or because of sleep problems. And so I would just do my nutrition work to improve their gut or their digestion. And it turned out that for some of them, the first child I ever did it with, he'd never spoken, and he was 4 years old. He'd been nonverbal, and 4 days after we changed his diet, he had a little chair where he sat at a table, and he just picked up the chair and said, "Mummy, my stool."
Wow.
And he'd never spoken. So she rang me in tears. There was no baby talk. There was no babble. And I need to share with your listeners, that doesn't happen for everyone.
Yeah,
but that was my first experience. And of course, that made me think, there's something in this. I don't understand it yet, and it won't make a difference for all children. but dietary change was really worth trialling to see if it would make a difference for some of the severely affected children.
Wow. First of all, like, thank you for sharing that. It's just, you can see how much it means to you, but I can imagine over the, years since your research, there's been hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of children who have improved their quality of life, like you set out to do when you finish school, because of your research, because of that curiosity, like your professor said to you. So, like, you should be so proud. I guess from, like, what's the takeaway from it? And this is, once again, like, not health advice. This is, like, general in nature. But did you find, like, hey, babies shouldn't be drinking, like, as much cow's milk? Or is it just based on the baby, or, like, based on the child and their system? Like, so any sort of, not advice, but, like, generic advice, as in for just children when they being brought up on milk?
So, if the child starts to my clinical experience was that if the child had what are called streptococcus-based illnesses, so streptococcus being a bacterial infection, it's the main bacterial species behind ear infections, tonsillitis, bronchitis, croup, that type of thing. So if a child was getting not just a one-off, but recurrent ear infections or recurrent tonsillitis, recurrent bronchitis, then it was very worth trialling a 4-week cow's milk protein-free way of eating. And at the time, if they were being breastfed, then mum needed to do that to get the cow's milk protein out of her breast milk.
Okay, interesting.
And it's all a trial to see if it makes a difference, because there's no test for it.
Yeah.
And for some of the children as well, sometimes they were zinc and or iron deficient.
Okay.
So addressing that would also make a difference. But yeah, it was really very, very surprising and eye-opening to me to see the change in some, not all, but some children when cow's milk disappeared from their world.
Yeah, wow, that's so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. It just intrigues me so much, the medical world around nutrition. Like, I've spoken to many psychologists, neuroscientists, doctors on the podcast, and it just seems like the lack of not awareness, but the lack of, like, focus put on our nutrition from your generic going to see a GP, let's call it that, which is what most people's experience with a doctor is. Like, very rarely does diet even come up. And I'm like, it seems like the absolute foundation almost for all of us. Like, how are we running our body? Like, how is the biochemistry of our body working? It starts with the food that we're eating. And for me, it just intuitively feels right to eat food that has come from, like, growing and then eating it. Not something that's been put in a packet, put on a shelf, gone through 15 sets of hands, gone through a chemical process. Like, that's not food. So from your experience, what sort of foods should we be prioritizing? What sort of foods, I say foods like this, should we be avoiding from someone who's a nutritionist? And under the guise of, like, the common mistakes that we're seeing people make.
So for me, I think we've made nutrition really complicated, and it doesn't need to be. And I'm not taking away from the fact that some people need very specific advice, but generally... For me, there's no such thing as junk food. There's just junk and there's food. And at the moment, we call food whole, real food. Yeah. But it's just food. Yeah. And it's all we've ever eaten up until the very, very recent past. So if you think about the extraordinary length of time humans have been on the planet as a species, the junk is very, very new. And it's the junk that's the problem. Yeah. So when we focus on eating mostly whole, real food, our body, our physiology, our biochemistry, everything responds in such a favourable way, because what it is so capable of doing and balancing and maintaining, it's not being interrupted with substances that can take away from that. So I think it really helps to think about food that way. There's food and there's junk. And when I was growing up, we only had junk at birthday parties, whereas now the junk is part of a lot of people's everyday choices. Oh, absolutely. And there's extraordinary, for me, it kind of feels like common sense, but there's brilliant research being done out of a university in Christchurch in New Zealand, where it's her entire research focus is helping mental health with food and getting rid of the junk. And the results are, not surprisingly, profound. Yeah. and effects on anxiety, effects on depression. It's really profound, and it makes sense when you think that what we eat literally becomes part of us. So when we eat protein, it's broken down into amino acids, and those amino acids literally become part of our structure. They make the neurotransmitters in our brain and our gut. They create our muscles. They make all the enzymes that make all our biochemical reactions run. Iron, for example, is housed inside a protein inside our liver. And so your body's got to rebuild that little cage out of amino acids, and all of that comes from our food. So it's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah, it just fascinates me so much. Like you said, it's like we shouldn't call it like organic food. It should be like, that should be food. And if anything, if it's been sprayed or at all genetically modified, that should be called like not food. I don't even know what you call it. Can we just talk about that just maybe for a second? Like when you're saying there's food and not food, like, what do you mean by that? I understand that like food is either an animal product that hasn't been, genetically enhanced or squeezed with, I can't even think of the word, like what chickens just get pumped with, like steroids and stuff to grow faster and bigger. And like, what should we be looking out for? Because it's very tricky now. It's all quite sneaky. And like, the way I view it is, if it's, a fruit, a vegetable, or a meat product, it's food. Most other stuff, obviously you've got grains and rice and stuff, but most other stuff like isn't. Anything that's got like what I look out for is if the ingredients has like a list, then it's like not a food. It's like a whole bunch of stuff put together to feed you and make someone money.
Spot on. And so when something comes out of a packet, sometimes it might have 3 or 4 ingredients, and you recognize those words, and you could make that in your kitchen. So let's take hummus, for example. You can make hummus in your own kitchen in a blender, and the same ingredients you do that with, you'll find them at some of the markets around the place. But if you pick up a hummus that has a preservative in it on the label, you're not going to put that in your kitchen. So that has altered the structure of that food. Let's just touch on preservatives for a second.
Yeah, please.
They're not there to enhance human health in any way. They're there to extend shelf life in the hope that that thing gets sold. And how do you extend shelf life? You prevent the growth of bacteria. But we've got between 0.5 kilo and 4 kilos of bacteria living in our large intestine that play a crucial role in everything from our immune function to what calories are worth to neurotransmitter production for our brain. In other words, they play such a crucial role. And it was common sense, and I used to think about this, but research finally demonstrated it at the end of 2017, that just the small amount of preservative that people eat, if they have wine with preservative in it, dip, like a lot of dips like hummus that you buy at the supermarket have preservative, dried fruit has preservative. So you can get all of that preservative free now. We're really fortunate. But just that small amount of preservative people were getting was unfavorably affecting their gut microbiome. So it's just those little things. So when I say eat food, not junk, the hummus at the supermarket that doesn't have the preservative, that's just got the 4 ingredients you would use if you made it in your own kitchen, I would still call that food. Yeah. Whereas if it's got the preservative or it's got lots of added stuff that doesn't look familiar to, where the words don't look familiar to you, then it's junk.
It's probably not good for you. Yeah. One more thing just on nutrition real quickly. What about organic compared to non-organic? Because obviously, like, you go to the farmer's market and there's only one organic store at my local one, but the rest are beautiful fruit stores, which you kind of feel like you're at a farmer's market, but they're all sprayed with pesticides and different stuff. How important is it to be aware of that? And obviously, like, the biggest roadblock I think people think with eating more clean and healthy is the cost, but I love the idea of you're either going to pay the farmer or you're going to pay the doctor. I'd rather pay the farmer. So yeah, what's your knowledge around organic and inorganic? Because it's very hard to find organic food nowadays, and it's more expensive.
So I have this thing, so I care about it hugely, and I actually find it astonishing that we don't know the names of our farmers, and yet we know the names of our dentists and our doctors, because our farmers, if they stop caring, the whole world's going to fall apart. So the more a farmer cares about the quality of their topsoil, the better human health, animal health, planetary health is going to be. So if we want to win, not just a win-win, but 3 wins, that's a massive tick. So if you it's not possible for all people, but if you can shop at farmers markets and to make organic selections where you can, you're paying that person directly. You've cut out the middleman. Yeah. There will be stalls at farmers markets where they might not be certified organic, but they'll have a little sign up that says spray free.
Yeah.
So shake their hand and thank them, and that's still going to be good quality produce. They just haven't gone through the process potentially of fully cleaning up the soil or regenerating the soil, but that's a great step that something's not been sprayed. Also too, as far as the cost goes, there are people and it's sad that this is the case, but it is the truth right now. There are people in the world who can afford it and those who can't. And I implore the people who can afford it to go there, because the more...
Support them.
Yes, the more people who can afford it support those farmers and those growers and demand that, prices will come down. And then that benefits everybody. So also too, another little thing to think about, we can think about the way the food has been grown. So if we think about a banana, the outside's been sprayed. If it's conventionally grown, no one has any idea how much of the pesticide, herbicide penetrates into the fruit, but you're going to peel it. So maybe it doesn't penetrate, don't know. But with an apple, you're going to eat the whole thing. So if it's a matter of cost, you can also weigh it up based on, am I eating the whole thing, or is there a skin that's going to be removed? So that could also be another little factor that helps with decisions.
Interesting. One last thing, when it comes to meat, organic compared to, or like grass-fed compared to grain-fed, like, and just once you kind of finish just the meat side of stuff, like, why is it important to have this? Because these hormones that are going into these animals are growing them, but then we're consuming it, so it's going into us, and they're hormones that, you know, are chemically produced that weren't around, like you said, more than 50, 60 years ago now, since we've industrialized food and made everything bigger and shinier. And like, should we be looking for organic meat, and like, how important is that with like our hormones consuming, you know, animals that have gone through like hormone replacement?
So I like to think about, for all species, eating in what I call a species-specific way. So when you think about those grazing animals, if they were left to their own devices, they're going to eat grass, they'll pursue pasture. Yeah. So a species-specific diet for a cow is grass. Yeah. So when I was doing my PhD, there was another researcher further down the corridor, and they were looking at this was again in the 90s, and they were looking at the difference in the fatty acid profile of grass-fed meat versus grain-fed meat, and they are worlds apart. So in the grain-fed meat, the fats were what we call pro-inflammatory. And in the grass-fed meats, there was a decent amount of omega-3 fats, which is anti-inflammatory. And we don't ever hear about that. You only hear about fish being talked about as anti-inflammatory. Yeah. So when the cows and the sheep are given or simply provided with the food that they instinctively know is going to nourish them, there's not just benefit for the animal and for the soil that they're trampling on, but also for the humans consuming the meat. So there's a really big difference. So grass-fed is incredibly important for those foods.
There you go. That's a great takeaway for, you know, anyone listening right now. Just, you know, try your best. Obviously there's hurdles for people to get over, but it's just making those little like 1 or 2 degrees changes, and then eventually over time you're a far healthier person. And it's just like I said, I like that idea of like, you either pay the farmer now or you pay the doctor later. So it's like, all right, how can I invest a little bit more in what I'm eating? Maybe eat a little bit less, which I'd love to talk about that. Are we eating too much? I feel like the whole 3 meals a day is like such a myth that's been created by all these food companies who just want you to eat, because I feel like I'm like not a big eater, but I also don't burn too many calories now. So it's like, I kind of just like base it off like how much I need. So yeah, question, are we eating too much? And maybe off the back of that, you can mention a little bit around fasting, what knowledge you have in that, because I know a lot of people like will do that sort of 16-hour without eating a day and then have lunch and dinner. That's sort of what I go off. I still drink a coffee in the morning, but that's pretty usual what I'll do just because it feels right for me. How much should we be eating, and is fasting something worth looking into?
So I feel that as far as overeating goes, even portion size for a lot of people, it's way too big. And if you think back, you'll be too young to remember this, but through the low fat era, which was when I was educated, when there's no fat in food, you get really hungry. And so that's when snacking first became a big thing. And that's where people started to eat 5 or 6 meals a day because they were on these blood sugar roller coasters with spikes in blood sugar from low fat, high carb foods. Yeah. So that's when snacking kind of came in. So it's been a big transition, I think, for a lot of people who lived through that low fat era where snacks were you were told they were favourable and fat was the enemy. Nutrition information actually moves in about 30-year cycles. And things kind of come back around, like at the back end of the low fat era, the high protein era came back in, and that was nothing new. It just kind of changes its form a little bit. Anyway, so yeah, a lot of people overeat. I also want to clarify though, Cooper, there are definitely people out there who don't eat enough. And there are girls especially who lose their periods because they don't eat enough. So there's a condition called hypothalamic amenorrhea where they literally don't get their periods anymore because there's not enough nutrition going in or they're over exercising. And my worry is that nutrition it can be really polarizing. And the way I like to look at it is almost like a spectrum. And when I speak about, choosing grass-fed, for example, and doing your best to choose organic food, as you so gently said, it's just taking a step in that direction. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Just do your best and do what's practical for you. And also it doesn't mean that anything that's not that is going to just suddenly destroy you. Eating a handful of blueberries has actually got so many benefits in it. It's even more beneficial if they're organic. Yeah. So I think there are people who hear health information and then become very frightened of food, and it's very difficult to have great health when you're frightened of food, and people can end up starving themselves or having a really disordered relationship with food and not remembering it's there for our nourishment.
To fuel us,
Yeah. On a physical level, but also mentally and emotionally, it's crucial to that. So I think there are people in the world who don't pay any attention to nutrition and they might overeat, and I would encourage people who kind of feel like that, just as you said, take a step in the direction of raising your standards, taking a bit better care. And then there are other people, I think, who are so frightened and they're so restrictive, their health would benefit if they relax just a little bit, and a tub of hot chips won't hurt them, kind of thing. Yeah. So it's understanding your own self, and some people need some rules and structures. I prefer to use the word standards. Yeah. And other people will get better health if they just chill out a little bit. Yeah. If they've taken it too far.
Take what feels right for you, and just, I think once again it comes back to awareness. Like everything just comes back to awareness.
Exactly. As far as fasting goes, I think other than Labrador dogs, we're the only species that needs to be told to take a break from eating. Like every other species regulates themselves. And not that long ago, the shops used to shut and you'd have your dinner, and if you were hungry after dinner, you couldn't go to the petrol station and get an icy pole or a chocolate bar. It was, what if it wasn't in the house, it wasn't available. So it's kind of, there's lots of, I'll get to and I'm sure other people you've spoken to and you will already know some of the validity of the scientific benefits of fasting. So I'm not negating it, but I just want to acknowledge that it is a very modern structure that has kind of needed to come in a little bit to help guide us humans with appetites that feel out of control. And I'm way more interested in that idea of what is it that leads us to start eating and then we feel like we can't stop. And we now understand a lot more about ultra-processed foods and some of the ingredients in those. Also, we now understand that when you have high circulating levels of insulin, which is supposed to be in your blood to lower blood glucose back into a healthy range, but some people become insulin resistant where their body's making too much insulin just to keep their blood glucose in the normal range. We now understand that constantly high insulin makes people constantly hungry, and that usually gets created from, or certainly contributed to by sugars, all the processed foods.
So what I'm hearing here is like, get your diet, swayed a little bit healthier, and a lot of other problems or challenges that a lot of us face with overeating, with, mental health challenges, with crashing and, being tired. inflammation, so much of it comes from the nutrition. And that's the thing that a lot of us, are getting wrong. So yeah, really interesting. Let's now talk about your 4 pillars. I would love to, for one, you to explain, I guess, biochemistry for the, layman's terms for people listening. And then, the importance of the biochemistry of our food when we're ingesting it, or the biochemistry of oxygen when we're ingesting it. So let's start with biochemistry, first pillar.
Cool. So if you think, I'll give you some practical examples because I think that helps us all to digest the info. So I'll actually use alcohol as the example. So when we consume alcohol, the human body can't get rid of that. It's got to be converted into another big, long, stupid word called acetaldehyde, and then that will become carbon dioxide and water, and we can actually get rid of that. So it's actually acetaldehyde that's quite toxic to us, and that's the thing that gives us the hangover if we're not clearing it quickly from the body. So a good way to picture what happens is if someone consumes alcohol, the body has to work immediately to get rid of that, because if it accumulates in our blood, it will poison us. We can go into a coma and die if it gets too high. So the alcohol arrives at the front door of the liver, and the liver has to make an enzyme. It's got another stupid name that no one needs to remember, but there'll be geeks listening, so I'll say it. It's called alcohol dehydrogenase. And that enzyme is going to convert alcohol into acetaldehyde. So it's first step of detoxification before it can leave the body. But that enzyme, most enzymes require a catalyst, and most catalysts are nutrients. So if you imagine that for an enzyme to work, it's like someone has to strike a match and put the flame to the enzyme to kind of light it up like a fuse to make the enzyme operate. So for that conversion to happen, and the nutrient catalyst for alcohol dehydrogenase is zinc.
Okay.
So that's an example of biochemistry and the crucial role of nutrition in biochemistry. So there are literally billions of B for billion. There are billions of biochemical reactions going on every single second. And we don't instruct them. We don't have to check in with them and say, can you do that and that and that and that today? It just happens. But some of the pathways become inefficient when we are nutritionally depleted or deficient, or if there's just insufficient nutrition going in. So I feel like so many people write things off to age or stress, and I'm not denying that age and stress don't play a role in how we feel. Of course they do. But for so many people, not getting great nutrition is taking the edge off their energy and their vitality and kind of their greatness. Because when you think about life with lousy energy, everything is more difficult. So you might think, I don't have the energy to cook tonight, I'll just get takeaway. I don't have the energy to go for a walk, I'll just sit on the couch. When you have lousy energy, it impacts jobs you might apply for, new friends you might make.
Everything.
Your self-talk, the way you talk to everyone you love in the world. So when we don't have great energy, and it affects everything. And so the biochemistry of energy creation inside of us is completely dependent on what we eat and micronutrients as well. So just to even think about energy creation inside you to run all the cells of your body, but also then for you to have energy to get about and do the things you want to do in the world. That entire process is created through the biochemical pathways of your body, which rely completely on nutrition.
Wow, it's just so it's
so cool.
It's so interesting because there's obviously so many other things that affect our body, like our sleep, like our breathing, like our water intake. I want to talk about now, you kind of touched on there, this idea of, our body going through all these different chemical reactions and stuff, but there's sort of things to bring us into a parasympathetic, like, I just want to go into like the idea of how obviously all this matters, but if we're in a sympathetic state, our body's going to act in a different way. Yeah. And as I was telling you before, I'm learning about this at the moment in a breathwork course. Actually, I told you about the 4 A's thing, but in my breathwork course, we're talking a lot about how as humans, we're sitting in this sympathetic state way more than we used to. We used to, for hundreds of thousands of years, be in that state maybe once a week if there's a tiger or another tribe coming to get us. Whereas nowadays, we get an email, someone cuts us off in traffic, we, kick our toe. Like all these little things seem to trigger us and bring us to this sympathetic state, which my understanding is our body isn't performing optimally if we're in that state. It's performing in a way to, raise our cortisol, to raise our adrenaline and get us moving. But for our body to do these chemical reactions and the biochemistry to be working, my assumption is it probably works better when we're in a parasympathetic state, when we're a bit calmer, when our system opens up to these reactions happening rather than survival. Am I completely off the mark there? I got a bit lost at the very start of that, but I found where I was going with it in the end. But yeah, how important is it to, be in that parasympathetic state for these chemical reactions?
So love that you've raised this. Love that that's part of, what you're studying about and what you care about, because I care hugely about this as well. I wrote a book back in 2011 called Rushing Woman Syndrome, rushing like hurry.
Yeah.
And that's what it was about. And so it was essentially how we can get stuck almost with the sympathetic nervous system activated.
Always, yeah.
And I think what we do have to be careful of is glorifying the parasympathetic nervous system and vilifying the sympathetic nervous system. The problem, a really healthy person swings between each of them effortlessly. And when we're just sitting, we might be sitting at our desk or standing at our desk doing our work. In that situation, ideally we're in a parasympathetic state. But what a lot of us do now is we live with the sympathetic nervous system activated when we don't actually need it. So you want obviously that SNS to jump to life when you've got to escape from something. If a car drives out in front of you and you've got to suddenly slam on your brakes, that's when you need it.
Absolutely.
But most of us just live like that, as you're suggesting, and that's the problem.
And does it have an effect though on how other systems in our body work if we're in sympathetic?
Yeah. Oh yes, hugely. So firstly, as you will be aware, blood vessels are constricted. So some of the changes that happen instantaneously when we go into that fight or flight response, that SNS activation, I sometimes call it the red zone. So our blood pressure increases, and 1 in 3 Australians has high blood pressure. There's many mechanisms behind that, but this is one of them.
Yep.
The second thing that happens is the blood supply that's normally so fantastic to our digestive system gets diverted away from digestion to the periphery, to the arms and the legs, because that's what's going to power us to get out of the danger, because the oxygen and the nutrients are in the arms and the legs. The third thing that happens is it changes the fuel that our body perceives is safe and appropriate for us to use. So in any given moment, we're always using a combination of glucose and fat. But as we're sitting here right now, are you using 50% glucose and 50% fat? Or are you using 80% fat and 20% glucose, or the other way around? And what's going on with your nervous system is a huge driver of the fuel that you use. So when you're in sympathetic nervous system activation, your body needs a fast burning fuel to power you to get out of there. And that's going to be glucose. So I've met thousands of people over the years who've almost lost the ability to use body fat effectively as a fuel.
Ketosis, huh?
Because their body gets the message that glucose is their best choice. The fourth thing that happens when we're in that SNS state all the time is all sorts of inflammatory compounds are produced. And the body knows that long term that's damaging. And as you mentioned a moment ago, historically, when we only went into that sympathetic state when there was a genuine threat to our life, but now we go there because of psychological stress, essentially. So caffeine puts us everyone block your ears. You're not I won't be your best friend when you hear that. But caffeine leads the human body to make adrenaline. Our perceptions of pressure and urgency, and we make a lot of things urgent these days that we don't need to. And also worrying either consciously or unconsciously what other people think of us. All of that can lead us to live in that SNS dominant state. I'll give you a really good example. When a lot of people were working from home, I'm always interested in, I want someone to give me an actual example of something that would stress them out. And a really common one was a colleague phoned me and said, "Where's that work? I needed it yesterday." And when I speak to audiences, I actually use that as an example, and I say, so can you put your hand up if that occurred for you? Put your hand up if that would stress you out. And about 2/3 to 3/4 of the room put their hand up. And then I thank them. Okay, now put your hand up if that would not stress you out. And about a quarter of the room puts their hand up. So that's how you know that that stress is not real. That's how you know it's coming from your thinking. So let's just pause. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that there's very real and genuine stress going on in the world right now, and there's very real and genuine stress going on in people's lives. There is also a huge amount of stress we create for ourselves because of how we think, and that's the part we can change. So that's what I'm interested in. And so when you think about that situation of the colleague phoning you and saying, where's that work? I needed it yesterday. What makes that, if that is stressful for someone, what makes that stressful is that they haven't heard what the person says. They've heard what they think they meant. Mm-hmm. So you haven't just heard their request for the work, but you've made up a story that they perceive you in some unfavourable way, that you're inefficient, not hardworking, not a team player, not competent, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they didn't ring you and say that.
Yeah.
You make that story up, but you're unaware usually that you've made that story up.
Yeah.
But that's what will lead you to have that sympathetic activation in that moment. And because for so many of us, we're not aware that we're doing that to ourselves, we can get to the end of what is an ordinary day and say, that was really stressful. When the majority, if not all of it, we created from our own thinking. So I think for a long time we've been told to manage stress, and it's not really working out that well for many of us. But when we get to if you pause and ask the question, what leads me as an individual to produce stress hormones, you can get a lot of insight. And some of it is an exercise I do with people. I call it forward words, and I'll say, tell me how you need others to see you. Name the traits. And people will say, I need to be seen as hardworking, competent, reliable, efficient. Or they might say, I need others to see me as kind, thoughtful, selfless. And so then, okay, identify what your words are, what your traits are that you need others to see in you. And then the next time you're stressed, pause and consider, am I perceiving someone is seeing me in the opposite way to these words? And most of the time the answer will be yes. And then it changes the actions you can then take.
Yeah, I love that. And once again, I'll say it comes back to awareness, like catching yourself when that triggering like thoughts happening and going like your forehead thing, like, wait, am I just thinking that they're not seeing me as like this kind or grateful or empathetic person? And for me, that really comes back to this idea of living by values and you knowing to yourself each day if you live to them, and just you hold yourself accountable. If someone says to you, I needed that work by yesterday, I told you about it, instead of arguing back and letting it triggering you, for one, like being, like taking accountability and just being like, you know what, you're right. Like, looking at criticism not as criticism, but somebody critiquing you. And that's something I learned from Emma Murray, mindset coach, is amazing. And she said, try and look at like criticism through the lens of like criticism when there's like, I call it destructive criticism, when someone is putting shit on you and you kind of need to have that awareness of, you know what, they're probably just going through something themselves, like have empathy for that person. But then the other side of it is when someone's critiquing you, when someone's pointing something out on you that triggers you, but then having the awareness and the maturity to be like, you know what, you're right, I should have had that to you yesterday, I'll get it to you tomorrow. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, you've disarmed it because you've taken responsibility for your feelings, and it's very hard to do that. And I sound, like this monk when I talk about this stuff, but I get it wrong 9 out of 10 times, but I'm trying to build the awareness so next time I get it right 8 out of 10 times, and just like improve on this stuff rather than just continually be triggered by the same stuff.
It's beautifully said. And that would be game changing for someone to consistently apply, that would be game changing.
Exactly, but it takes time, and it takes
time.
It takes repetition of like learning about this stuff. I feel like we've gone a bit into nutritional. I feel like we talked just then about the biochemical. We've talked about quite a lot around the nutrition, which I think is important. But the last pillar that I am very fascinated to talk to you about is the emotional health, and this is something obviously me working in the mental health space is so important. And it's impossible to get up and eat healthy, to do exercises to, bring us back to the parasympathetic if we're just in this really dark place. And they all do link to each other. That's the thing, like your emotional well-being, like as we've learned through this chat, is quite linked to your nutrition, what you're eating. It is also linked to how well you can control this flow between sympathetic, parasympathetic. So before we go to emotional, and this is probably going to link to it, what recommendations do you have for people to be able to control that flow between sympathetic and parasympathetic. And I'm pretty sure I know what answers you're going to go with here. I've got a board right here next to me of things that if you look through all of my habits and rituals that I try and do each day, which I don't do each day, but I do quite often, are breathwork, meditation, exercise, getting in nature, reading, stretching, communication with my partner, cooking at home, self-care, being offline, practicing gratitude. Pretty much all of them, from my understanding, are things that help you get to that parasympathetic. So as much as, we can blame the world and the world that we're moving into and, take no responsibility, like, it's not your fault. Anyone listening right now, I want you to know, like, it's not your fault that you're probably in the sympathetic more than you want to be. But it is your responsibility to learn some of the skills that now we have great science prove will bring you into that parasympathetic. So going off that, what are some of your tips to help people move from that sympathetic to parasympathetic, just like to have a skill to get there?
Extending the length of the exhalation. And we could kind of both drop mics and wrap it.
Yeah,
it is
a breath.
Yeah, your breath. And so when the exhalation is longer than the inhalation, the parasympathetic nervous system is activated. When it's reversed, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. And that's why if the breath is the same length, you have one activated and then the other one activated, and it's the human body is honestly miraculous when you think that that's what happens. So we can't access the parasympathetic nervous system with our conscious thinking mind. It's controlled by the subconscious, but the only way we can get in there is through how we breathe. So with conscious breathing, and for a lot of us, if you think, because there's all this background noise in the mind, bucket loads of caffeine, as in the overconsumption of it, worrying, about a conversation you had 4 hours ago, having 600 unopened emails and worrying that people think you're inefficient, not getting back to them, whatever is happening, consciously or unconsciously, a lot of that makes us breathe faster and in a short, sharp, shallow way where the inhalation is longer than the exhalation. You can't override that with your thoughts. You can't sit there and go, oh, come on, just chill out. That won't override the power of your breath. Whereas if you pause and observe how you're breathing and then extend the length of the exhalation, it will put you back into that parasympathetic activation. And it can help just to even draw, if someone listening if you work at a desk, draw a rectangle on a piece of paper, and every hour on the hour, run your finger along the outside of the rectangle a couple of times. So inhale with a slow count of 4 for the short side, exhale for a slow count of 6 for the long side, 4, 6, and go around that 3, 5 times. And it's a really lovely little ritual every hour on the hour, because you reteach yourself to observe how you're breathing. And if you do that enough, you eventually notice that you are diaphragmatically breathing in a lovely slow way when you're just operating your life, and you'll notice when you come out of it. And then, unless you need to come out of it because you've got to dodge the traffic or whatever's happened, you've got the tool to come back come back down.
Once again, awareness. Like, the breath is so powerful. It's with us every moment of every day of our life until we die. And it can make such an impact, and so many of us aren't using it as a tool. Like, I'm such a big fan of, I'm sure you've read Breath by James Nestor. Of just like nasal breathing. It's, something that we're moving away from. Once again, it comes back to nutrition, as I've read the book, and I'm sure like, by eating softer food, it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility to start to, actively breathe through our nose again. Like, there's so many benefits of it, like a vasodilator. It opens out our airways more when we're breathing through our nose. It opens out our blood vessels. Like, there's so much to the science of breath. But I think what you just said is, like, fundamentally the simplest thing is just to bring awareness to it. Are you breathing out for longer than you're breathing in? Are you breathing through your nose and down to your diaphragm, up under your ribs? Or are you breathing through your mouth and up to your chest? Like, once we bring awareness to this, it slows us down. It allows us to think clear. It allows us to make better decisions and to live a better life. When we're, up high and tight, we're probably going to go and grab for that packet of chips, rather than when we're walking through the supermarket in a calm state. You go, actually, you know what? I'm in control of my decisions right now. And that's what I think a lot of it comes back to, just having agency and, like, being conscious of our choices that we make each day, but then also taking responsibility for our actions, which is reflecting and going, oh, you know what? I am getting a bit of stuff wrong.
And even when you think about Sorry, just super
No,
quickly.
go. I've got all the time in the world. I'm looking at my clock because I'm like, shit, I'm in an hour and I've got all these questions that I still want to ask. But how long do you have? Do you have to go?
No, I'm fine. I'm all good.
Thanks.
So when you think about when we extend the length of the exhalation, the other thing that it does is it communicates to every cell in our body that we're safe. And when there is a perceived lack of safety through thoughts or through our chemistry, you can imagine that it then changes so much to do with our health. So, for example, the hypothalamus, the region in our brain that is where the nervous system meets the endocrine system, the hormone system, it's communicating to the pituitary, telling the pituitary to then talk to the adrenals, the thyroid, the ovaries, the testes, whether we're safe or not. And they then respond accordingly. And so when I've done work in women's health, ovulation is really, really important because after ovulation, you produce a big surge of progesterone, which is an anti-anxiety agent, an antidepressant, it's a diuretic. So it has a role way beyond fertility. It's crucial for fertility, but it has a role way beyond that as well. And yet if we perceive, not one off, but all day, every day that we're not safe, then the body doesn't think that ovulation is wise because you risk bringing a baby into a world and your body's getting the message that it's not safe. Yeah. So when we talk about extending the length of the exhalation and you think, oh, it's just so simple, how on earth could that make a difference? If people think about it as communicating to the physical structure of your body that you're safe, that sense of safety then allows your body to do all the things that it's capable of doing, and it's magnificent.
It's fascinating to hear that because obviously when you got here you saw Bobby's, there's a little photo, my little niece and my sister obviously went through her infertility challenges and they ended up getting pregnant naturally, and it was once both of them, for one, like kind of let go of the expectation. They're like, oh well, we're going to do surrogacy, that's all good, that's beautiful in its own way. But then they both started meditating, they both started being healthier, and hey, they miraculously got pregnant. And another really fascinating story that's been on this podcast, have you heard of Nigel Beach from New Zealand?
No.
I'll send you some of his work later. He's a really cool guy. He's calls him like a human performance specialist. He's a physiotherapist, but really into breath. He's worked a lot with Wim Hof and done some stuff. But he tells this beautiful story on my podcast where him and his partner were trying to get pregnant, being told by many doctors, nah, you can't, endometriosis, all this stuff. It's not going to happen for you guys. So they're obviously very disturbed by that, devastated by it. And then he found Wim Hof and started doing it and started learning from him. He was already, a physio and stuff himself, and started doing it himself and saying to his partner, you got to do this. And, you got to do this. And obviously we know with breath work, it's a great thing to regulate our system, to put us in that parasympathetic, to signal to our body it's safe. And what you just said there around signaling to your body it's safe to carry a child, this so intuitively sounded like it made sense to me. And I think there's probably going to be plenty of women listening right now that, are in a pretty heightened state, aren't eating healthy, aren't, going through a lot of stuff. And obviously people can get pregnant in any situation, but if you are struggling, what he learnt, Nigel, was his wife was like, no, I'm not doing that. And then one day she came out and did the breath work and started doing a bit of cold exposure. And a month later they got pregnant naturally. Now they have 2 beautiful kids, and they got told by all medical professionals, no, you can't have kids. So that's where I see is like this telling your nervous system it's okay. Like we're so intuitively intelligent and we don't trust it quite often. I don't even know where I was going with that, but can we just talk quickly on like more into the women's stuff? Because that was quite often a lot of the questions I had from people in my community, women struggling with endometriosis. What's your, I guess, take from someone who is a women's health expert?
So there's some really new research around it looking more as an immune-related condition. So it's been considered up until now very focused on hormones, and certainly an excess of estrogen doesn't cause it, but an excess of estrogen makes it worse. So any strategies that help with estrogen metabolism can make a difference to the person's experience of endometriosis. So some of the things that I've seen make a difference in my clients, unfortunately, alcohol is probably the biggest disruptor of healthy estrogen metabolism through various mechanisms. When we're living on too much junk and not enough food, of course, that has very unfavourable changes on the gut microbiome, and there are some bacteria in the gut microbiome that just deal with estrogen. That's called the estrobolome. And some of those bacteria actually produce an enzyme for the geeks listening, it's called beta-glucuronidase, but that enzyme can actually put estrogen back into circulation.
Okay.
And there are some concerns with endometriosis that is happening with the gut microbiome. So certainly reducing alcohol to absolute minimum, eating food, not junk, and including plenty of vegetables in that is actually really important because of the prebiotics in the vegetables to really help with that gut microbiome. I have also had some women, not all, but some women respond incredibly favourably to a super strict dairy-free way of eating with the endometriosis symptoms. And then there are also some beautiful medicinal herbs that are best prescribed for individuals by a medical herbalist who knows their health history, but some common ones are things like bupleurum, anything that also helps liver detoxification like St Mary's thistle, gentian, globe artichoke. So anything that supports great estrogen metabolism that I've touched on can be really beneficial. There's a substance in the brassica family of vegetables called sulforaphane, and I'm pretty obsessed with it. It's I put it in the green drink that I make with BioBlends. It makes a big sulforaphane daily consumption can make a really big difference to some of those estrogen excess symptoms as well. So just simple lifestyle things, and also being really, I guess, and it's hard sometimes when the pain is so severe as it is for so many women with endo, but being as gentle as you can with yourself through those days. And it's not always practical, I know, to take time off work, or there might be other responsibilities to other family members. And good old-fashioned warm castor oil pack on the abdomen can also offer some relief.
Okay, amazing. I don't even know what PCOS is, but someone said, what food lessens symptoms of PCOS? Kind of similar stuff, maybe, what we just talked about? Or
PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and it's actually, I can kind of get on my high horse about this, so I'll try not to because it'll take up way too much time. It's a really badly named condition. It's actually a condition of excess androgens and excess insulin, and that's what stops ovulation. So cysts form on the ovaries because the eggs have ripened and come to the surface, but ovulation hasn't occurred, so the little eggs just sit there and become little cysts. So we want to address whatever is preventing ovulation from happening, and with PCOS it's elevated androgens and elevated insulin. So yes, food goes a long way towards that. There's also a supplement that has good research behind it to lower insulin. It's called inositol. So the research shows 2 grams twice a day. That's not me giving you medical advice, that's for education purposes, but 2 grams twice a day is what the research shows makes a difference for dropping that. And there are 2 herbs, and I put them in Cycle Essentials, the BioBlends product that I developed for that, licorice and peonia, which allows the pituitary to talk to the ovaries to help foster ovulation.
Okay. Beautiful.
Yeah.
This is all stuff that doesn't really matter to me, I guess, but it's so important to my audience.
To your community.
So yeah, I'm just sharing for my community.
Yeah.
A couple more women question. Women going through menopause and also caring for children, finding balance. Any advice there?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can really give advice other than I think it's a really tricky thing to prioritize meeting the needs of little tiny humans who literally require you meeting their needs for their survival, and you also meeting your own needs at a time when there are all sorts of changes going on, particularly biochemically, and not just with sex hormones, but it's a big time of transition for a lot of women, even with things like thyroid function. We could talk underwater about that for the next 16 weeks. But
now that anyway. I know you're in Burley, we will catch up again. Probably not too long away, because there'll be lots of follow-up questions, I think.
So I think it's almost like understanding what your basic requirements are, and I know you speak so much to values. It makes a difference because we've got 24 hours in a day and we make time for what we prioritize. So, and if someone shows me what they do in a day, you kind of see their values, don't you? Because you make time for what you value, you make time for what you prioritize. And so when we are just relentlessly prioritizing others and not acknowledging our own values, we will then suffer. And to even acknowledge what matters to you, what matters, just some really basic fundamentals, and creating the space for those awareness, as you have said time and time again, and it's so important, is key to that. So becoming aware of what matters to you and what are the 3 little things that are going to make the biggest difference for you, then do that. And I would say, and it's a little bit, I did a lot of interviews last year with women who'd been through perimenopause, and one day at the end of a day of interviews, I just wrote in my phone that what would solve so much suffering, this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but what would solve so much suffering for women going through perimenopause is resolving iron deficiency, some acupuncture, and staying off their phone.
Yeah.
And
Amazing.
it would make a big difference.
I think that's just a great answer, this idea of, making sure you prioritize yourself. And, anyone with young kids, it's like, okay, you need to make sure you have that going for you as well. I could talk to you for days, and we'll have to catch up again. Now that I know you're in Burleigh, we'll definitely catch up. But I did get introduced to you by the social media person on your brand doing bio blends. So I thought it'd be great. And it's also something that I have on my full potential board, supplementation. I think it's really important. I'm bummed actually. I'm doing a podcast in a few weeks with the guy who's going to read my blood tests for me. And I'm sure you can probably read blood tests. I wish I had them to show you. We can do that another day down the line. But supplementation, talk me through the creation of bio blends, and obviously with the diets that we all eat now, the importance of having supplementation for us. For me, I kind of get up and always try and have a greens in the morning, because I feel like as much as I do eat fruit and veg, I probably don't eat enough. So yeah, tell me through the creation of bio blends, what some of the products are, and just maybe it starts with the importance of making up the things that we miss in our diet.
I'm the first person who wishes we could get everything from food,
Yeah.
but I don't believe that's possible now for
Yeah.
8,000 reasons. So yeah, I made bioblends, but I made it all from food. So
Yeah.
a lot of supplements are synthetic. They're made in a lab. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to create everything from food and from herbs. And I'm a bit painful to work with on it, because thankfully I've partnered with a sensational manufacturer in New Zealand to create the products, who understand my ridiculous standards. So even when some of the ingredients, because they're foods and herbs in powders, some of them are really sticky. And so a normal manufacturer will say, we've got to add a flow agent to that, like magnesium stearate or something like that, and I don't allow that. So if we have to use something, it's still food. So it might be organic rice husks that allow it to flow through the machine. So that's the level that we go to keep their purity as high as as high as it is. And and you can really people feel the difference. They write to us every day and say they feel the difference, because they're just made from food and herbs.
Let's talk about what you're seeing most people, what are your guys' main products? I know you've got a greens, you've got a zinc, because what are the things that most of us, obviously we're calling this on averages, but are missing out of our diet, and the importance of supplementing?
Yeah, so big fan of greens and the greens powder, so organic daily greens. Then also zinc, it's the second most common nutritional deficiency in the world. Iron's number 1, but zinc is number 2. We absorb zinc. If you're going to take zinc as a supplement, you're best to take it just before you go to bed, because its absorption is interfered with by lots of other things. There's also a product that contains a lot of bitter herbs, and that's particularly good for the liver. So liver, you want to love your liver, and a lot of people make lifestyle choices these days that it's almost, they operate almost like they could just get a backup liver anytime, and we can't. And it's an organ that we really need to take care of. So liver love, then cycle essentials, which helps to foster ovulation, ease, and calm restore. So calm restore soothes the nervous system, and
help assist get to that parasympathetic.
Spot on.
Amazing. Well, I'm very excited. I just got sent some. I think it's going to get here in the next day or two. So I'll let my audience know what I think of it. But I'm a big fan of taking greens and trying to, make sure we have an understanding of our health. Maybe I feel really bad that I'm taking heaps of your time, but I don't as well, because my audience is going to be very grateful. I just wanted to ask you, how important is it as, a doctor and a scientist to be getting our blood tests? How regularly would you recommend people? Because knowledge is power. And now with, the testing and the advancements in technology, we can learn quite a lot about ourselves so that we can make educated decisions when it comes to supplementation, when it comes to nutrition. What advice would you have for people around getting tested? I'm getting my blood test, like I said, next week, so I can use it.
So good. So knowledge is power with this, and it's the only way we get insight into what's actually happening inside us.
Yeah.
So a yearly blood test, I think, is a really wise step to take. If someone has if someone is found to have iron deficiency, you need to make some changes and then retest after 3 months to see if it's making a difference, because there might be absorption problems. But if you get blood tests back and you're really well, then yearly, just to make sure you're staying on track, because if things do change in an unfavourable way, then you can get it back on track pretty easily. Whereas if you find out you're deficient, then you want to get on top of that. And so I would suggest blood tests every 3 months if you're deficient.
Okay. And just to make it simple for the person listening who's like, I reckon there's going to be like 60% of people probably never get there, I didn't have my blood tested until I was 30 or 29 for the first time. And now it's been like 3 years since then, or 2 years since then. So I'm going to do it again now. And it's only because I interview people who are doctors who can come look at my tests. But if you're just, the average punter, want to get your blood test, like, what's the protocol? Like, you got to go to a GP first. Say, I want to get like my testing done to get my overall health. And then you go to a pathologist. Then, like, does a GP know enough, or do you go to a naturopath? Like, what would be your...
So it depends on what you're experiencing and what you really want to have assessed. So an integrative GP is a GP that is usually really happy to do blood tests, and they've got a holistic view of things.
Okay.
And they are usually really interested to see what's happening with nutrition and the way nutrition can change some of your blood test results.
So an integrated GP, because your average punter GP, I've had some...
Well, they're not trained in nutrition. I think they get somewhere between 2 and 6 hours of nutrition training in 6 years of uni. So
scary.
It's just not their world. We need to...
Their world's treating symptoms.
Yeah. And I think there's a place...
Yeah.
Emergency medicine is really amazing if you've had a car crash.
Of course.
What a crazy
Never
gift.
discredit that, but I think the other
With
side of the pharmaceutical
stuff,
system is just like, ugh.
With lifestyle stuff, that's where we want to, I think, look holistically. And the great thing is you can actually order your own blood test these days.
Okay.
So there's a couple of services online where you can just click the ones you want to have tested, and then you go to your healthcare professional. So it might be a really experienced naturopath or a really experienced nutritionist, because you want that kind of insight. About your blood. The trick is, if you order your own blood test, you don't want to just sit there and if you read some of the comments at the bottom, they won't be about you. They're just general comments. And I've had some people order their own blood tests and freak out because they've read these comments that have nothing to do with their results.
You have to let somebody who knows how to read it. Yeah. It's like reading a language you don't know how to read.
Yes.
That's the way I look at it. It's like...
Perfectly said. So you just want, if you're going to order them yourself, you want someone you trust to interpret them for you.
Yeah, well, that's what I did. I got told by this doctor, here's what you should get done, because you can get so many different things tested, different prices. So I did that online, picked the package that they said. Now I've got that on my computer, the PDF, and now I'll take that to the pathologist, get that done, and then he can read over the reports to give me some advice or direction on, supplementation or lifestyle choices to change.
Yeah, magnificent. But even just if that feels overwhelming to someone listening, for a female, for example, across the menstruation years, it's so common for women to be iron deficient. So even just no GP is going to push you away or reject your request for a blood test for iron. So you want iron studies. That's 4 different parameters that look at iron. So if some of your female listeners who are across those menstruation years, find out if you're iron deficient. If you've ferritin, which is iron storage, if it's less than 50, your blood test will say that's fine. Your energy usually doesn't come right until your ferritin's at a minimum of 80. We want it there. Even 100, you'll feel way better. Okay.
Yeah, there's just been so much that we've chatted about today, which I absolutely love. And now that I know you're down the road, hopefully we can catch up again. I just am so fascinated by all of the stuff we spoke about today. And there's a million more things that we could have gone into. But I am conscious of your time and, very, very grateful for, I'd love to talk to you about gratitude and the neuroscience of that, because that's a big part of my life. We'll save it for another time. But the last question I always finish Good Humans podcast with is, what does being a good human mean to Dr. Libby Weaver?
Contribution. So however that arises, whether it's just with how I show up, with whatever energy, with whatever presence, or in a bigger picture way through education, through doing a seminar, a workshop, writing a book, whatever it is, but it's contributing in some way. And I think when we're truly present with another person, I think that's a great gift to both the person with the presence and the person on the receiving end of that. So, contribution is...
I love that. And it comes full circle of what we've spoken about today. Like, we can't show up with good energy and contribute to others unless we first contribute to ourselves, and take care of our nutrition, take care of bringing ourselves into that parasympathetic more often. That way we can show up, in a better emotional state for those around us. Lastly, if anyone wants to find you, I will leave in the show notes the link to BioBlends. I'll leave in the show notes a link to your Instagram and all of that good stuff, your website. Is there anywhere you want to point people towards? Anything coming up? Anything exciting you want to share for the last little parts for my listeners?
Oh, you're so kind. I've just finished writing a book. It's with my lovely editor right now. So that'll come out in about April of this year.
Wow, that's soon. The editor's going, then it's bang straight out. Mine,
Yeah.
I got to finish mine at the end of March and it comes out in October.
Yeah, it's a full-on process, isn't it? I'd love to chat to you more at some point about that book creation process, because it's got its highs and its lows, but it's a great gift.
You've written like 12 or 13 bestsellers or something, haven't you? That's so cool.
I do really love doing it.
That's so cool. What's this new one about?
Iron deficiency.
Iron deficiency.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with it.
Okay, and if people listening today were going to go and buy one of your books because they want to learn more, what do you recommend?
Whatever topic jumps out at them.
Okay.
So, yeah.
It's like asking your favourite child, hey?
Yeah, good call. Yeah, The Invisible Load is probably up there. I wrote that in 2019. That's the one that gets right to the heart of stress. But Rushing Woman Syndrome that I wrote in 2011 was it's still a bit of a fave. So,
well, I'll leave in the show notes links to a few of your books and everything. But thank you so much for jumping on Good Humans Podcast.
Thank you for how much you care.
Oh, I just love learning.
Same.
Amazing.